Hi, I'm Mike Opperman with Black Dirt Communications, and here today to discuss what I think is some of the most impactful technology that's come in the dairy industry in a long time, and that is activity monitoring. Today, we're going to explore how cow monitoring can simplify and improve dairy farming practices. If you've got questions throughout this program, make sure to click the question mark on the right side of your screen, and we'll compile those questions and try to get to them by the end of the webinar. If there's some reason why we don't get to your question, we'll keep that question in hand and you'll get an email from an Allflex team member with an answer. So as we go through the process, make sure that you're clicking on that question mark, submitting your questions, and we'll make sure that we get you an answer in a timely fashion. I'm honored to have a panel of producers who are using the technology. So let's start by hearing a little bit more about them. We'll go around this virtual room to get some of their introductions from everyone on the panel. So Seth, let's start with you. Tell us who you are and a little bit about your operation.
My name's Seth Atwater. I'm from Western New York. We have around 1,100 milk cows, and we have ear tags on all of the cows, and we love it.
Awesome. Great, Seth. Next, let's go with Brian. Brian, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your operation.
This is Brian Waymeyer, and I work the manager at Tony DeGroot Dairy in Hanford, California. We milk 4,500 Jersey cows on 2 facilities, and we have activity rumination collar system on 2/3 of the cows. And then about another month, we'll have the whole herd collared.
Great. Amanda, let's hear from you.
Hi, my name is Amanda Buschor. I'm dairy herd manager at Majestic View Dairy in Lancaster, Wisconsin. We've had the system for about 10 years now. 2 years ago, we became fully integrated. So we have the collar system, the sort gate, and then we put the parlor in as well. We have about 1,100 milk cows also. Having it in for 10 years, I'd say it's going well.
That's great. And last but not least, Stephen, let's hear from you.
Hello, my name is Steve Banta. I'm the manager for Shamrock Farm in Stanfield, Arizona. We've got both a conventional herd, 10,000 cows, and a organic herd of 600 cows, of which I'm the manager. We've had this system in place for almost a year now, so we're a pretty new user, but we've got it on every animal on the place, from milk cows down to breeding heifers.
Great. Well, thanks for everyone, and we certainly look forward to hearing your insights today on this webinar. But first, we're going to hear from our panel expert, who's going to talk about the current situation in dairy herd monitoring and how Allflex is transforming day-to-day management practices and overall dairy business efficiencies. Then we'll open up to the panel for more of their insights and personal experiences with using the Allflex technology. So first, let's hear from Steve Pavelski with Allflex, who will talk about, as I said, the current situation, including how partnering with Allflex has impacted hundreds of dairy farms by monitoring hundreds of thousands of cows in the U.S. and millions of cows globally. So, Steve?
So Allflex Livestock Intelligence, we're currently monitoring hundreds of thousands of cows in North America and millions around the globe. A lot of customers are drawn in by the advantages we can give them in heat detection, but we know now, and many of the customers on the panel can share, that it's the health detection that's really a game changer on dairies today. Not only on individual cow levels, but on overall dairy management and how that gives them insight on how to make adjustments at a whole herd level. But being able to find cows earlier in disease than previously possible is really created a paradigm shift on the dairies that have adopted our technology. Cows can be equipped with either a collar or an ear tag. And so it's really a form or function. Which do you prefer, an ear tag or a collar? But, we're measuring, mainly, we're looking at activity and rumination, but there's many different cow behaviors we're recording, and panting or heavy breathing is one that's really revolutionized the way that our dairies today are looking at heat abatement strategies. And so we're really giving a lot more insight on a whole herd level as opposed to just individual cow levels by the behaviors that we're recording as well. So Allflex has been in the rumination monitoring game longer than any other company. And, so we feel like, we're a lot stronger in that space. We understand the importance of simple, actionable data. We want the reports to be accurate. We want them to be simple, and we want them easy to be interpreted. And so, the saying that I always use is we have all kinds of complicated algorithms. We collect an immense amount of data, but at the end of the day, we need to have a simple, accurate list for the person that needs that list, whether it be heat detection or health detection. We want to make sure that it's easy for the end user to utilize that dairy so we can get the fastest ROI possible. And again, we're all about simplicity. So, I have the joy of working with North American dairy producers on a daily basis as part of our support team. And it really is a lot of fun to see our panelists come together today to share their stories in the Allflex monitoring family.
Great. Thanks, Steve, for that insight into Allflex technology and how it can be beneficial for dairy producers around the world. So let's get into now to our panel discussion, and we'll just again go around our virtual room here. Amanda, you've had the system for a while. Tell me about the system that you have and why you decided to go with Allflex in the first place.
So back in 2010, we decided to go with this system back then simply for to have better repro management and to reduce our shots, not really knowing how the technology and the precision of the technology would just kind of keep expanding over the last 10 years. So that's all just been greatly beneficial. But back 10 years ago, it was simply shot reduction and better repro management.
Great. Brian, if you could kind of talk through the system that you have and why you chose Allflex.
Yeah, so 5 years ago when I came on, they had already made the decision to go with the system. So to be quite honest, I was very skeptic at first because it is quite a large investment per cow up front. And but they made the decision to go with it, and I said, okay, I'm going to run it to the best of my ability. And in about 3 to 4 months, I was completely sold on it. We primarily, when we first started, we did it on transition cows through freshening. They didn't really want to go all in with that big of an investment, but about 5 months into it, we then decided to make the decision to collar half the herd after that. And slowly over the years, we've slowly invested on more and more collars, and this year will be 100% collared in about a month.
So certainly that initial investment certainly has paid off.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Seth, how about you? Tell us a little bit about your system and then why you decided to choose Allflex.
We first looked at it in 2010. Our herdsman of 12 years had left us, and we were faced with hiring someone else to stay on top of heat detection and breeding, or purchasing a system of some sort to help us do that. And we looked at two different systems, the Select Sire system and the Allflex system. So we went with the Allflex system, and at that time they only had the activity on the collars that we had anyway, and we put them on just the cows leaving the fresh group and the breeding population so that we could have a base established before their voluntary weight period. So we use them just on the breeding cows, and as soon as they got confirmed pregnant at their second check, we took them off and put them back on the fresh cows. So we only had 300 or 400 collars at the time, less than half a herd to get the job done. We decided to switch to the ear tags just because we thought it would be easier, and in my opinion, they're way better to deal with than the collars. So then we ear tagged everybody, the entire herd. So we're taking advantage of both the reproduction benefits and the health side of it too. And it has been an eye-opening experience having the rumination side of it. We didn't realize how much we were missing when we only had the activity monitoring with the collars. So that's what we have now.
Great. And Seth, we'll kind of go with the next question. We'll start with you. In terms of thinking about where your dairy was and how you managed your dairy before you started with the Allflex system, how different is that today than it was back then before you had the system?
Well, back then we were at an 18% preg rate before we started the system, and we were 100% double OVSync with minimal or poor heat detection, visual heat detection. And after being on the system for a couple of years, we basically went up 10% to 28%. We hover between 28 and 30% usually now. And we're no longer on the double OVSync because we're relying on the system to find those heats, which it does a good job of. So we're using way less shots. We've also doubled in herd size since we went on it in 2010. So that was a big part of it too. So it was going to involve a lot more labor without the system to do a good job. And so we basically kept the same amount of labor, doubled herd size, and took our preg rate up 10%.
Well, that's great. That's some great benefits. Brian, I know that you kind of came into the system, but if you could kind of recollect before you started with the Allflex system and to now, how has your herd management process changed?
We've focused primarily more on what we can control and focused more on, what were we doing to the cows? Was it really beneficial to the herd? How we were managing them. We went from locking up fresh pens every day and checking cows to once a week just to move cows out. Reducing amount of fresh cow treatments, sick cows. We move cows out of the hospital based on rumination, not just how they look. Out of the fresh pen into a bigger fresh pen, and it's been a big paradigm shift as far as being able to get more done with less.
That's the name of the game, right? In this day and age. Yeah. Amanda, you've been in the system for a long time, but how you managed before the system changed from where you are today?
Yeah, kind of along the same lines. We really make a point to not intervene with cows' daily routines now. The less touches, the better. Mm-hmm. There's some days we don't even go in our fresh pen, so they can just lay down and do their thing, and we're not disrupting them in that way. It's really been a heaven sent for me for being a mother of 3 little kids and trying to manage 1,100 cows, that there are times that I can be at home and still manage these cows and get on my computer and say, you need to look at this cow or you don't need to look at this cow, because we've had it so long. I can trust the graphs and know exactly when to intervene, or if I even should. So those are some great benefits in my perspective.
Well, that's really saying something when you can manage 1,100 cows easier than 3 kids. So that's great.
Yeah.
Steve, how has the transition gone in terms of day-to-day management changes as you've implemented the system?
Well, we have a pretty small herd, relatively speaking, with 600 cows. And so there are only a few of us on the dairy at any one time. And the daily activities of milking, breeding, feeding, identifying and treating sick cows, cow movement, we pretty much went seamlessly into that. I mean, the first thing we do every morning is go to the computer and look at the reports that have been printed out prior to us showing up, so we can sort of identify the tasks that we need to do, see if there's any cows that need immediate treatment. So our transition is pretty seamless.
Seth, I'll throw that question to you. How was the transition? You've been on the system for a while, but how did the transition go in terms of day-to-day management changes as you got into, the system and the ear tags and so forth?
When we initially went on the collars, it was pretty seamless. We just, like I said, put them on in the fresh group, and I guess we backed off the shots at the time and must have changed our protocols a little bit, but it was very easy switching over to that. When we switched to the ear tags from the collars, it was a little sketchy because we had two separate computers running on two separate software programs. So it was a few months of, having to look at two separate heat lists, and but it was pretty seamless considering we were completely switching over to the ear tags. But we just went ahead and we bought 600 originally of the ear tags and put them on until the rest of our collars, the batteries died. And then we bought, I think, 400 more or something to finish out the herd at the time, and put them on everybody else so that the entire herd was ear tagged.
Sure. I'll switch gears a little bit and talk about business aspects. So, Brian, we'll start with you. So how do you see Allflex, the Allflex system, contributing to the success of your dairy business long term?
For us, we've been able to reduce the amount of sick cows by changing how we've managed transition. The information that the callers have given me has said, hey, what you're doing it's not working. You need to change something. The cows are telling us we just didn't know. We didn't have the data in front of me to say, hey, that's wrong. And that just had this huge trickle-down effect through the whole lactation of the cows. We immediately saw more cows coming in heat earlier, to where we were naturally knocking them off our off-sync list, to where now I've made the decision, no more shots till 110 days. And at that point, if that cow's really not cycling, I really take a hard look at her. And I used to not be able to do that with this size large of a herd. So starting to make more individual cow decisions on this large of a herd, it's huge. How I see it.
Amanda, how about you? From a business aspect, how do you see the Allflex system? How has it benefited your business, and how do you see that benefiting your business long term?
To me, the overall health of the cows and being able to have reduction in vet costs, vet medicine costs, expenses, knowing exactly when to cull cows instead of trying to hang on to them and treat them. Just really trusting in those graphs telling you like, hey, this is a cow, you should just sell, or instead of, we've really been pushed in this industry to do that instead of hanging on to these cows and then trying to sell them. And so that's really, it's helped our death loss rate and that perspective too. With like the group rumination, we look at that daily because we want to know when there's feed changes going on, or if the herd's going through something like a dysentery, we know it right away. We can fix it right away. We don't have to wait for the cows till somebody sees their symptoms 3 days later. We know it within hours that something's going on with those cows. So just being one step ahead of the health aspect of it. And then also knowing if those treatments or those changes are working. You could be treating a cow and she's not getting better. Okay, well, let's change, like her rumination's not coming up. Let's go ahead and change up the treatment, or discontinue treatment. And then sometimes too, letting cows just come out of it themselves. I compare it to humans. Every little hiccup that we have, we don't go to the doctor and get medicine and get treatment. Sometimes there's some things they can just naturally work through themselves. So being able to make those decisions like that, I think financially is huge and long-term, because you're keeping healthier cows around longer. So,
well, those are great points. So we're going to you've talked a lot about the benefits of your systems respectively so far. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into some more specific benefits of using the Allflex system. So I'll start off with Steve. If you could think of what are one or two real key benefits that you see from using the Allflex system.
Well, I'd say number one, we've seen an increase in our ability to detect and find cows in heat. And that's huge, as we all know. Number two is, and this echoes, you hear a lot, I think, from all of us around these same points. This system allows cows to be cows in a way. I'm sure all of us hate driving by and seeing cows locked up, and we know they have to breed them or treat them or move them. But I think when you can minimize that it's beneficial for the herd as a whole, as well as individual cows. We went from locking up every single cow every day to locking up just 2 AI pins. Mm-hmm. And those are intangible benefits, I think. Are you going to get any more milk from that? Maybe not. But certainly, as Brian mentioned, what consumers want, I think, is becoming more and more important. And our farm, having been in Arizona since almost 100 years now, image is very important to us, and reputation is very important. And our ownership is very focused on the health of individual cows. Even though we farm wide, we've got a lot of them. Every cow is very important. And so the more we can do to make those cows healthy and comfortable, we see that as a real benefit to our business model.
Right. Brian, what from your perspective, what are one or two of the key benefits you see to using the system?
My medicine bill has been cut in 3/4 here. Mm-hmm. That's been huge for us. Also, kind of what Amanda said is during ration changes, watching the groups, been able to find issues. I've been able to find entering into the feed program a wrong number. Been able to find that in 4 days versus finding that in the bulk tank or 30 days later when the crash has happened and you're trying to figure out what the heck happened. Mm-hmm. So that has been absolutely huge for us to just prevent the crashes and get on top of it quickly.
Yeah, it really helps to be proactive in that way, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So let's talk about reproduction a little bit. Seth, you mentioned some benefits that you've seen in reproduction from using the system. How has using the system changed how you breed cows? You mentioned pregnancy rate, but maybe mention that again. How it's benefited your pregnancy rate since using the system.
Well, prior to using it, like I mentioned, we were on a double ovsync program, which I think is a pretty widely accepted program that we know works. but with the heat detection system, there's no need for all those shots because the system can do it for you. So we were running around an 18% preg rate on the double odd sink at the time. I think you can do better than that now with everything we know, but at the time we were 18%, and it took us a year or two to get there, but we took all those shots away and simplified it to a pre-sink, off-sink, and we cherry picked the ones that come into heat after their voluntary wait period. So I think around 75% of the cows get bred before their time to AI, 75 to 85% probably. So they're only getting a couple of the setup shots. And with that routine that we're doing now, we're running around an 28% preg rate with fewer shots and no visual heat detection. I mean, before we were with the double odd sink, there was not a huge incentive to look for cows in heat because everybody was getting shots to get synchronized. But now we literally do no visual heat detection because there's no need to. And we're running a 28% preg rate with fewer shots and no heat detection. So it's with the system, I've pretty much figure we save one full-time guy from having to chalk tails and give shots and do heat detection that way. So I think the labor savings alone from having the system probably covers the expense of it, let alone all the other benefits of using it. So it's been good.
Right. We'll talk a little bit about labor later on, but Amanda, from a reproduction standpoint, I know you've talked about it as well, but how has using the system changed the way you breed cows, and how has it impacted your pregnancy rate?
Mm-hmm. So back in 2010, when we implemented the system, we were doing some tail chalking, but mostly synchronization with shots. So I think that the shot reduction and the cow handling is number one. The other thing for me is knowing exactly when to breed a cow, even using conventional semen versus sex semen, when we should really know when to put that semen in that cow. Should I breed her this morning? Should I wait till this afternoon? Did she just come into heat? Did we just see her ride for the first time? Or she been doing that for 2 hours, 3 hours? The precision of when to do that is, I think, what has really contributed to our preg rate. I would say back in 2010, we probably ran like average low 20s. As of right now, we're running a 34% preg rate. We average about 110 days of milk open, or average 110 days open. Mm-hmm. And even, I believe in preg rate, don't get me wrong, but I think from the financial perspective, 2.2 services per conception, the 110 days, like I mentioned, with high producing cows. So we're also expecting a lot of them. I think financially says a lot about the system.
If you're using sex semen too, it's even more important with the timing and so forth to make sure that you're breeding cows at the right time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about, Amanda, from a health perspective? I know that you had mentioned that as well, but how does the system benefit your herd from a health perspective? What has changed in how the way you look at health of your dairy?
It's changed everything. That's such a, I mean, I wish I had 20 minutes to talk about it. But I mean, I've literally caught cows because of the system, like twisting their uteruses at calving, like as it was twisting. I've caught our herd, as I mentioned before about the dysentery, like hours into it. So we could get on top of it. We could put that probiotic in right away instead of waiting 3 days later when we seen it in the bulk tank. Catching DAs on day 1 or 2, catching them within hours instead of 6 to 7 days, so that they're recovering faster, using less antibiotics, after or post surgery, like I said, also not having to go in and monitor the fresh cows physically as much. We were on the typical temp, 10-day temp. We were sleeving every fresh cow at 4 days in milk and 10 days in milk, making sure they're cleaned up. We don't do any of that anymore. This morning, I moved a bunch of cows out of our fresh cow pen and treated 2, and I was in and out of there in like 30 minutes. Because when you go in there, you already know who you're looking for. So you just go in, you look for her. You don't have to look through all the other ones to find who's sick. You already know who is sick when you walk in that pen.
Oh, that's great. Steve, from your perspective, from an organic dairy perspective, how has using the system affected or benefited your herd from a health perspective?
Well, it's really been tremendous. We're very limited in what treatments we can give. And so when we have a cow that comes up on the system as having a health issue, on the health index, it's called, we've designated that as a cow who's, quote, off feed. There's just something, the cow has dropped in her feed intake some way and is not ruminating at the level that she's used to ruminating. So we pull those cows out and we'll give them an electrolyte and energy type drench. And then we use our visual skills. Is that cow, can she go back to the herd? Does she need to spend time in the hospital, closer observation? But one thing that the system showed us is really interesting is we took the data we had of cows being, quote unquote, off feed, and then we analyzed that a little bit more and found that the majority of the cows that we were seeing off feed are 8 or 9 days into their lactation, just when you don't want cows having any type of issue at all. So we changed to drenching these cows at freshening. And we've seen good results there, in our situation under our conditions, getting those cows off to a better start. And when the major thing we've seen, and this can't all be attributed to the collars, but there's certainly an effect. We've since we put the collars on the entire herd, the previous year prior and the year after, we've had a 50% decrease in clinical mastitis. And, we made some other management changes too, sure, that have impacted that number. But I think what the collars have helped in that regard is when we see these cows that are off feed, those could be mastitis cows. We just don't know it yet. And so you pull them out and treat them, and then they never really present themselves as mastitis cows. So, and as Brian mentioned, that sort of exposed a hole in our system, something we didn't know was going on. And I think that's a major benefit of the Allflex system, is it's going to help you identify where some of your blind spots are or some of your management holes and help you fix those.
It probably helps you identify some of those subclinical cows too, right? Where they might not be showing clinical visual signs, but you can see it through the data.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, and we could, I think we could do a better job in determining whether those cows are actually mastitis cows or not. But we've reached a point with the system where we're confident that if we treat them and they show improvement in their graph and data, then we don't mess with those cows too much longer. We just let them go back to the herd and let cows be cows.
Seth, what about from your perspective? How has using the system benefited your dairy from a health perspective?
Well, we've certainly find sick cows much sooner than we used to. Within hours if they're coming down with mastitis or if they have a DA. So earlier intervention, I think, is key in helping these cows come back around. We've had one DA in the last 3 months, and when we do have a DA, we find it right away and can fix it. So her road to recovery is usually a lot quicker and smoother. Again, same as everyone else, our fresh cow routine, we sit down at the computer and look at who we need to go find, and we go find that 1 or 2 cows or no cows, and don't need to lock everybody up for an hour while we temp probe them like we used to. And so I think that's key. The other part of it that nobody's touched on yet, I don't think, is the panting. We look at that more in the summer than we do in the winter, just from a heat stress standpoint. And we have sprinklers and fans in all of our groups, so it's, pretty even heat stress across everybody. But I think if you did have different areas of your farm where you had better cow cooling versus others, I think you could definitely see it in the heat stress reports. One time we had a hot summer day and the flies were bad and the cows were all bunched, and I have an orchard sprayer that I fog the barns with to spray for flies, and panting was through the roof. And I went out and I sprayed the barn, and within an hour they were all laying down and the panting was back down to normal levels. And it was just a huge response from spraying. And it was, I guess the moral of the story on that was I should have sprayed earlier in the day instead of waiting till they were already heat stressed. But it's really interesting to be able to look at that heat stress report that they have in there. But yeah, just fewer dead cows, and since we had the system installed, which is nice, and earlier intervention, I guess those are two big areas.
Right. Brian, there's been everybody has talked about kind of benefits to labor, but specifically with your operation, how has using the system benefited from a labor standpoint?
So we pretty much better utilization of labor, primarily been able to focus the labor on the cows that actually need the help. And with that, we've been able to, switch the labor into doing other things, other chores that, we've primarily had to wait till we've had a low in calving season to go get some of these chores done. Now we kind of stay on a more regular maintenance schedule. So we haven't really reduced labor, but we also here in California are staring down an 8-hour work week. So we're looking at the collar system. When that happens, is do we go to a sort gate to reduce the amount of hours our breeders are here? So with the system, we're going to be able to maybe manage that hurdle when it gets here.
Mm-hmm. So that really will help with your labor efficiency as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, because we're going to only have 8 hours, and I mean, I got to utilize those 8 hours. Those guys are here to the max. So
right. Steve, what about from your perspective, from a labor standpoint? I know you mentioned there aren't as many people maybe that work with your group of cows, but how has it benefited your system from a labor's perspective?
Well, the same as Brian, we haven't reduced the amount of labor that we have to get things done, but we're certainly much more efficient. We, as already been mentioned, we know the cows we're looking for as far as treatment goes or breeding. So it's helped our breeder be more efficient. It's helped. I guess one way it's helped is we spend less money on vet checks because we check less cows. But I would just say it'll certainly, I think for most herds, increase the labor efficiency, and you'll utilize labor more efficiently, more productively.
We'll switch gears a little bit and talk about more about finances. Seth, from a financial standpoint, what have been some of the benefits of using the Allflex system?
Well, easy one to calculate, I guess, is the number of shots you're given. I mean, we're just saving all kinds of shots by using the system to find the heats. So that's an easy one to figure out. Labor would be the other one. You're not paying somebody to go give those shots and go watch for heats and go chalk the tails and things like that. But the biggest one to me is milk production. I mean, they're with such a high repro performance. Obviously, the quicker you get that cow pregnant, the better, and the more lactations you're going to get, and the more time she's going to spend at peak milk production. So our rolling herd average has increased over the years, and it's a direct relationship with reproduction, I think, is the biggest thing that impacted that. So having those shorter lactations and more days in peak milk is one of the biggest implications to our profitability. And so I think that's the biggest result of having the system is just higher profitability from higher milk output from having better reproduction, and fewer shots and fewer dead cows and healthier cows overall.
Kind of all encompassing, isn't it?
Yes.
Brian, what about from your perspective, the financial benefits of using the system, but also in terms of time management, business management, things like that?
So it's pretty big here. So about 9 months into having it, we looked at an ROI, and it was about 16 months. But from what I know now and what I can put to pencil of how I use it, how we use it, it's about 11 months now on anything we purchase as far as on a recurring maintenance. And it has just, the one thing I've mentioned is I don't know how to put a financial number on preventing those crashes. And as far as like increasing our milk yield from that, also kind of how we look at things a little different. Amanda kind of touched on that. Preg rate is not like my big indicator. It's actually cost per pregnancy. It's kind of our big thing now. So we've been able to pull the shots, but now we're being able to maybe increase the value of our semen costs to increase the genetic value of the herd quicker, especially Jersey on sex semen, and then the amount of beef semen we're also using. So we're using even better bulls and increasing that genetic gain of our herd that much faster because I get that many good cows pregnant that quick. And so naturally now we're within the herd we're selecting for cows that breed back high DPR naturally within the herd, and we're using sex semen, and we're keeping those calves out of those cows, and the cows that don't breed the best, they're going to beef semen. So that's been the big financial shift for us is, we're internally breeding for better breeding cows.
So the investment you have in those animals is even higher. So it's even more important from a reproductive standpoint to get them bred back in a timely fashion, right?
Yes, we're not spending $16 a cow to get her to first service, like a double off sync would be. So, now we just spend a couple more dollars on sex semen, or better sex semen. So,
So it's just transition where you spend the money, right?
Correct.
Yep. Just a reminder for folks that are watching this, if you have a question for the panel, make sure to click the question mark icon on the right side of your screen, and then we'll try to get to those questions here later on in the webinar. Let's talk about support from your Allflex team. Steve, I think you had mentioned that one of the reasons you went with Allflex was because of the support of the team. If you could kind of expand on that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, we've been very happy with support. I think it's more and more common. We expect quite a bit from our partners in this dairy farming endeavor, and Allflex, to their credit, really brought a team approach. We have sales, service, technical support. We start very early at the organic dairy, especially when we're out on pasture. And, my 3 a.m. phone calls have always been answered. We've tried to minimize those as we learn to use the system a little bit more. But I can pick up the phone now and call just about anyone, on the cow monitoring side of Allflex and and be able to talk with them and raise any concerns or questions I have. I'd say the system's reliable, but it's like any other computer system. It's a computer system, and sometimes it needs some maintenance and to be fixed, and they've always been up to the task in getting that done. So we're very satisfied with the support.
Awesome. Amanda, what about from your perspective about the support that you get from Allflex in managing your system?
Yeah, well, having grown up, I guess, per se, with this system for the last 10 years, I can't think of a time that I've ever been disappointed in any employee. And also, like I have said, usually when there's something wrong, it's usually not the system itself. It's usually a computer thing, or, and even then, they're still answering the phone calls, like Steven said, 3 a.m., 2 a.m. Yeah, so even on the installs or transitioning for upgrade, doing the upgrades, we've done a few like some trial tags for Allflex and whatnot. They're always there to help, throw collars on and make sure things are running smoothly before they walk away. So.
Seth, what about from your perspective? You transitioned from collars to tags. How has working with the Allflex team kind of benefited your operation?
They've been extremely helpful whenever I've needed it. I mean, there's never been a question or an issue that's come up that they haven't been able to immediately address. Sometimes they find, if the system's down, they might send me a text or a phone call or an email before I even realize that something's wrong. But it's been the last few years, it's been very, very little support needed. I mean, it's a pretty tried and true system. Really hardly ever any issues, but on the rare occasion that they do, it's been extremely helpful and easy and no problems at all.
And then finally, Brian, what about from your perspective?
For us, it's been, as far as support, has been extremely well out west here. But I'd say the last 2 years has been the communication between Allflex system and my other dairy management systems has just exponentially grown to where better communication between the two systems has just made things a lot smoother for us on the dairy operation, and that has come from the support and the people they have hired, and it has just been huge for us.
Well, let's wrap it up here. Certainly, thank you everybody for your discussion. Just terrific information that you've shared today, and we appreciate the insights that you provided into your operations and how you're using the Allflex system. Now we're going to go back to the panel for a Q&A session where we'll cover some of the topics and answer audience questions that they may have not been addressed during the roundtable. And as a reminder, anyone interested in learning more about the Allflex Livestock Intelligence Monitoring System can contact the Allflex offices at 608-237-3170. Great. Well, let's get to the questions. I certainly have a lot of questions on the list to get to. Certainly, if you have more questions, make sure to send them in by clicking on the question mark and send them in. But we'll start off with a round robin question, taking a look back. So hindsight definitely is 2020. If you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently with the installation on your dairy? So Brian, let's start on the West Coast with you.
Probably would have put in more collars sooner. Would have been our biggest thing we would have done.
Mm-hmm. Steve, how about you?
Well, it's easy. We wouldn't have started during the summer. We have extreme heat stress here, and it just made it difficult to see if we're getting any good results reproductive-wise. So definitely would not have started it in the middle of the summer.
Mm-hmm. Seth, how about you? What would you have done differently?
Well, we started off with the collars that had activity only without the rumination, and the rumination information was certainly something I didn't realize that I was missing. So that's what I would do different, is put collars on everybody and have the rumination information also.
And finally, how about you, Amanda? What would you have done differently?
First thing, I think we would have collared heifers from the beginning, because now that we never have, we just have never gone back and done it. The other thing is we implemented the system as we were renovating a freestall barn. So kind of with Stephen there, we maybe just chose
better timing, right? Yeah. Obviously, this is a management system, and consultants are part of the mix. How has the system helped the relationship with your nutritionist and veterinarian? Seth, let's start with you on this one.
Well, the nutritionist, I guess, we're obviously looking at the rumination information and fresh cow performance on a weekly basis. We often, discuss how fresh cows are doing, and obviously the nutrition has a huge impact on that. And on the vet side, obviously we're looking more at the reproduction side of things, and things are really clicking along pretty good on that. So we don't often talk about that, but as long as our conception rates are good, then he's happy.
Brian, what about you? How's that impacted the relationship with your nutritionist and veterinarian?
With our nutritionist, we rely on the system to tell us if a ration change has worked. If it hasn't worked, I've told the nutritionist we're going back to the old ration and you need to work on the ration. With the veterinarian, he's totally on board. He thinks it's great because we're able to manage individual cows and watching them 24/7. So they have taken on the system and as a tool to better both of them.
Okay. Steve, this is a question specifically for you. For an organic farm, how important is this system to reduce the use of hormones and antibiotics? How important is this system in your organic dairy?
Well, it's we don't use any hormones or antibiotics. So before the system, we weren't using them either. But I would say, one of the biggest things we've seen is we're very rarely surprised anymore. Mm-hmm. You're always going to have a cow that's going to die suddenly, heart attack, something like that. But we're very rarely surprised about finding a dead cow in the corrals, from mastitis or toxic metritis or anything like that. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much been eliminated. So, because we can't use any antibiotics or hormones, it's been a godsend to us.
Right. Amanda, we've got a question about using the SCR milking system with the software. I know that you have that installed in your parlor. Kind of walk us through how you going to use that how you use that entire system together.
Sure. So we've put in the SCR parlor it was 2 years ago in March. The main thing that I use it for is culling purposes. I think we really, when it's on the health side of things, we still really rely on the rumination for the health side of things. But as far as culling and, an example that I have talked about before is, maybe you have a fresh cow that's not maybe quite milking like you assume she would. So you can kind of look shift by shift and see, is she just kicking the milker off a lot? You can see how long they're keeping them on, if they're reattaching her. Physically, the parlor itself is super simple. And that's exactly what I wanted. And that's why we chose the parlor that we did. Very user-friendly.
Sure. Steve, we got a question for you. Explain just the differences between the collars and the tags. I know some people may be thinking about transitioning, but just explain those differences.
Yeah, so just two main differences in the ear tags or the collars. Obviously one is battery life. So, we know that the collars are going to last somewhere around that 7-year mark, and the ear tags at this point are designed to last around 3 years. All right. The other main difference is the collars will act as a in-parlor ID or sort gate ID. So Amanda would, her identification in the parlor and to sort cows is all controlled by the collar. The ear tag is not able to do that. But from a data recording standpoint, if you go and look at a system that had half collars and half ear tags, you wouldn't see any difference in the rumination data or anything like that. So from a recording standpoint, it's the same. It's just a little bit different form or function, and then battery life.
Sure. Brian, I know you use embryo transfer a lot on your dairy. Explain kind of how the relationship between the system and your embryo transfer program.
We implemented where within the system we have a heat index gauge. People are eligible for embryo transfer have to be above a certain heat index, and that's bumped up our on especially fresh transfers about 3% better, and then also with it tied in is if a breeder, if they missed a cow getting her bred for some reason, she'll be automatically, if she's above a certain heat index, enrolled in the embryo transfer a week later. So we're catching another 4 to 5% more breedings throughout the week that way. All
great. And then kind of same on the breeding line. Amanda, I know you're using sex semen on your dairy. How's the system impacted the use of that technology?
We have gone to trying to not breed cows that are going to receive sex semen at the beginning of those hours, and kind of try to push those hours back a little bit, just to try to ensure that everything has the optimal time to reach each other.
Sure. So we'll do another round robin question, and this is about treatment protocols in the fresh and sick pens. Seth, let's start with you. How do you use the system to kind of manage those fresh and sick pen cows?
Well, prior to having the system, if we saw a cow that had an RP or some metritis or, whatever we thought was going on with her, we would just go ahead and treat her, assuming that she needed it. But with the rumination information, there's a lot of times where, she never skips a beat at calving. She ruminates great, but she does have an RP. And so there's instances like that where you decide, well, does she really need to be treated or not? And will she eat her way through it and do just fine? And so that happens quite a bit, that, you just rely on the system to tell you who needs treatment and who doesn't, versus looking at them sometimes. And whatever the system tells you, if you go and look at her, it usually agrees that, yeah, she's eating, or no, she's not. So you pretty much just learn to rely on the system to tell you which cows need it. So it really streamlines treatments in the fresh pen, especially, just because you know who to go look at after you look at the computer before you even get out there. So it really streamlines treatment, and the cows that really need treatment get it, and the cows that don't need treatment, you're not throwing antibiotics at them and wasting, money and treatment and labor to do that. Because if they ruminate all the way through it, then chances are they're going to be just fine without even getting treated.
Sure. Steve, how about you? How is in the fresh and sick pen, how has it impacted you?
Well, we found out, in our experience, if a cow's going to crash in the fresh pen, it's usually 7 to 10 days in. And in our experience, once we put the collars on, we saw that we were having cows dip right around day 8 or 9, go down in rumination. And so we started, the change we made is that we started drenching every fresh cow, sort of as a pre-treatment. And, for us in our operation, that solved the problem. So sort of exposed a little bit of a hole there that we're able to plug. And I think it's, so far, it's made a positive impact on our transmission cows.
Great, Brian. We got about 30 seconds left. How has that impacted your fresh and sick pens?
Yeah, so pretty much we use it, the rumination, to if we move fresh cow out of hospital into the larger fresh pens, and that has reduced our rate of return back to the hospital pretty much nil now, maybe 1 or 2 cows a week. So.
Great. Well, thank you all. We've run out of time for this session. I want to thank all of our panelists, Amanda, Brian, Seth, and Steve, and certainly Steve Pavelski as well, for your time and your information and your talents in this session. Just a reminder, if you sent in a question and we weren't able to get to it, we'll make sure to send you an answer here in the next few days. And also, this entire presentation will be available on dairyherd.com within the next couple of days. So again, thank you for participating. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to our panel members, and have a great day.